As night fell, the flickering lights struggled to dispel the dense darkness enveloping the old theater. Once a vibrant stage, it now stood as a mere shell of forgotten performances and echoing memories. In this eerie silence, a young artist, brimming with ambition, found herself face to face with an entity that did not belong to this world. The emergency lights flashed, revealing the haunting image of a girl with no legs, slowly approaching. Her face bore an endless sorrow, as if she were pleading for something only she understood. This was the moment that marked the beginning of chilling tales, where the mysteries of the past began to resurface, and the truth could be more brutal than any play ever performed on this stage. Are you ready to step into a realm where restless spirits refuse to depart? Join me as we delve into spine-tingling stories told in the rain, where lingering souls still wander, and the whispers in the night will keep you from finding peace. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Tonight, I have another collection of chilling ghost stories for you. We're also doing something a bit different tonight, an art speedrun, which will be displayed on screen. This artwork was created by Tag. You can find links to their work in the description if you'd like to check it out. So instead of darkness, you'll get to witness the creation of a terrifying piece of art as it unfolds. But for now, make yourself comfortable and let the darkness take control. I had this experience while working in 2014. As a photographer and videographer, I landed a gig shooting behind-the-scenes footage for an upcoming theater production. The photos would be used as promotional material for the premiere, which was just a week away. I was basically there to capture the rehearsal, with only the director, the actors, and myself on the large stage in town. It was fascinating to see all of the empty seats, while the director puffed away at cigarettes and swore loudly in a place typically filled with patrons dressed up for a cultural experience. The play was set in a beachside house built right in the middle of the stage. Several moments in the performance involved turning off all the lights in the beach house, plunging everything into darkness, leaving only the emergency exit signs illuminated. This pulled you out of the immersive theater experience and served as a reminder that, after all, it was just a play. Each time this happened, I would put my camera down and listen to the dialogue in the dark. On the third occasion that the lights flickered off, I again set my camera aside and patiently waited for my next shot opportunity. As I stood there, I began to see a grayish figure illuminated by the emergency exit sign. All the actors and the director were to my right, and there shouldn't have been anyone to my left. Curiosity piqued, I decided to turn and greet whoever was with me, hoping for a silent acknowledgement that wouldn't disturb the performance. What I saw has haunted my mind to this day and has forced me to reconsider my skeptical outlook on such phenomena. A young girl in a dress. Her hands were outstretched toward me, but not in a way that suggested she wanted to grab me. Instead, it felt as though she was begging for something, her palms facing up, fingers barely curled. Her face was etched with tiredness, grief, and despair. Strangely, her legs weren't there. She seemed to glide toward me, perhaps floating. The movement was incredibly smooth and gentle. I can recall the level of detail in her appearance so vividly. It felt as though I must have made eye contact with her for at least 2 or 3 full seconds, which, in that moment, felt like an eternity. After the third second, I finally broke free from my paralysis and instinctively turned my head away, swiping my hand in her direction as if to protect myself from an imminent collision between us. I didn't let out a sound, not wanting to embarrass myself in front of the theater crew. With a shaking hand, I lit up the monitor of my camera and pointed it toward where she had been, but she was gone. I continued to work, my eyes darting everywhere, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. I really wanted to talk to the theater staff about my experience, but I never did. Fear of ridicule and the potential loss of future gigs held me back. I never made sense of it. Maybe some of you can relate. Back in 2007, I participated in a theater workshop that spanned an entire weekend. We used the stage for all our thespian-related activities during the day and slept on it at night, using mattresses and sleeping bags. The theater building in question wasn't particularly old. It had previously served as a hospital, but could. Nonetheless, the theater had its share of ghost stories. One involved a supposedly unremovable, heart-shaped stain on the stage. According to legend, This spot was the result of a tragic misunderstanding that led to murder during the Napoleonic Wars. The story goes that a miller stood on that very ground. Not all of Napoleon's troops were gentlemen, and one of them broke into the mill and raped the miller's wife. Upon his return, the miller was informed of this heinous act and promptly challenged who he thought was the soldier in question to a duel. The miller won, and the soldier died. However, it turned out that the miller had accidentally challenged the wrong man. The now-dead soldier had only accepted the challenge out of a sense of honor, the same honor the rapist lacked, which is why he had already fled. Thus, the miller committed murder, not out of vengeance, but out of love. This is supposedly why the stain on the stage resembles the shape of a heart. The stain has reportedly been there since the building's construction in 1920. While it's mostly just a story, I must admit that the spot feels eerily unsettling. To add to the mystery, my brother and one of the theater employees once experienced ominous knocking sounds while sleeping alone on stage, waking up just a foot away from where they had fallen asleep. There was even a faint glow emanating from the stain whenever a play involving a love-based murder was performed. Of course, the latter might just be attributed to stage lights, but it has been said that the stain has never been successfully removed. I'm not sure if that's true. The other potential supernatural occurrence, one I can lend a bit more credibility to, is related to the man who managed the theater for many years before he sadly passed away in 2006. His name was Stefan Mueller. By now, you've probably gathered that this story takes place in Europe, specifically Germany. Stefan was incredibly passionate about his work, and his motto was not, "Everything is theater, but without theater, everything is nothing." I had met Stefan a couple of times during my childhood, as both my brother and sister performed at the theater when they were teenagers. As I mentioned earlier, my brother and I participated in a theater workshop over a weekend in 2017. I had heard of the stain story before, but my brother recently told me how it sometimes felt as if the spirit of Stefan Mueller still wandered through the theater seats at night, just as he had during his many years of directing. He had directed countless plays and would likely remain in the audience section, observing performances and offering advice, sometimes of a humorous nature, on how to improve what he witnessed. Stefan was a fair director, known for guiding children and teenagers without being condescending or overly lenient. It seemed to me that a man so skilled at his craft would have every reason to haunt the halls he once occupied so frequently. The first night was mostly uneventful, blending into the background due to my sleep deprivation from the past few days. I fell asleep the moment I hit the mattress, so I'll skip over the assortment of unimportant yet peculiar dreams and dive into the night from Saturday to Sunday. I tried to settle into sleep, but something prevented me from doing so. I focused on my breathing, hoping it would bring me peace and calm, but instead, I became aware of a noise that I had previously overlooked in my restless shifting. An almost rhythmic tapping sound, slow and steady, reminiscent of a man deep in thought. I couldn't tell if my ears were playing tricks on me, but it seemed as if the tapping came straight from the seating area. The story of Stefan's haunting flashed through my mind, and my heart rate quickened. Desperately, I tried to ignore the tapping and drift off to sleep, but it was futile. The sound was relentless, not loud enough to be alarming, but not quiet enough to be dismissed as mere white noise. It lingered, like a small spiderweb glistening with raindrops, poised to catch a fly if only it would take notice. Now I found myself ensnared in the semi-hypnotic strings of sound. I noticed that the tapping seemed to shift position, adopting a suspiciously walk-like pace as it moved from the right end of the auditorium to the left. Then I could have sworn it was approaching my spot. It came closer, and I tried to breathe calmly, only to realize that I had held my breath for the last 30 seconds. The step-like noise drew nearer until it was mere feet away. Then it stopped, only to move beneath the edge of the stage. I opened my eyes, greeted by the oppressive darkness of my surroundings. The auditorium had blinds lowered to help everyone sleep better, but I must confess, until the age of 15, I had slept with a nightlight, and even after that, I never shut the blinds. I wasn't fond of waking up to total darkness, especially when still dazed from half-dreaming, as it conjured bizarre, unwelcome visions. It was precisely this kind of darkness that enveloped me now, making it nearly impossible to see anything. After a few seconds, I began to discern crude shapes of seats, But this clarity only extended to the first few rows. The rest of the auditorium lay draped in impenetrable blackness. The noise persisted, so I decided to get up and leave the stage to use the lavatory. I calmed down as I entered the backstage area, faintly lit by an exit sign. I stepped into the restroom and was momentarily blinded as I flicked the light switch. As I went about my business, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. I reasoned that what I had heard must have been nothing more than something being knocked against the outer wall by the wind. Satisfied, I decided to return to the stage to sleep, but I was also compelled to trace the source of the noise. I walked back onto the stage, ascending the small staircase that would usually allow the actors to descend without jumping off the edge. But before I could consider making my way down, I halted. The noise still wandered, and I couldn't see anything beyond the first row. I stared into the void, my breath quickening with anxiety as my body tensed. Ever so slightly shaking, I wasn't certain just how long I stood there, feeling paralyzed by the darkness and the noise, unable to advance. After a while, I decided to retreat back to my sleeping bag and tried to embrace Morpheus's arms once more. The next morning, when I awoke, I didn't hear the tapping sound anymore. Just as well. I volunteer at our local little theater quite often, one that's fairly new. The building is less than 30 years old. However, being full of actors and creative types, I'm sure that dramatic souls are attracted to stay or visit. A few things have happened here that I thought would be of interest. The first incident occurred during a run of Hairspray. I played the female authority figure, a fun comedic role that came with a mic, but not much stage time. Two unsettling things happened during a show that shook everyone up. During the first act, I was chilling in the costume room when the stage manager came running around, frantically checking all the mics to see which one had accidentally turned on. Apparently, the audience was hearing a woman talking over the speakers. These were brand new mics that could only be activated at the sound booth, and the booth had already verified that nothing was on that shouldn't be. The strange voices eventually stopped after saying things like, "Hang on a minute, I'll be right there." Thus, the cast began to cast blame on each other until someone pointed out that the former president of the theater had passed away that week. A few audience members who knew her said it sounded just like her. Fast forward to the final scene, and I don't have to come on stage again until Bose, but I like to sit off stage on the piano bench in the right corner near the curtains, out of sight but within range of all the ceiling mics, lending my voice to the final song. There's lots and lots of dancing for everyone else on stage during You Can't Stop the Beat. We always jokingly called it You Can't Stop to Breathe, so every voice was needed. I was happily singing, sitting with my back to the wall, when I heard, as clear as day and louder than my own voice, a high-pitched woman singing a different song that I couldn't quite catch the words to, right in my ear. I had never met the woman who had recently passed, but when I later told the cast, they all said she was a soprano. That corner used to have a really negative energy to it, but never again after that night. We think she stopped by to join in one last show before moving on to the light, and in the process, she cleansed that area. All activity like that stopped after we took down the stage light that's traditionally left on after a theater member has died. A few months later, I was helping decorate for a production of 1776 and needed to find a candle holder for the room I was working on. The candle holders were in a room called Prop Heaven, and I had never been there before. Some of the stagehands took me up and turned all the lights on. It was the top floor of the second building the theater uses for smaller productions, and it reminded me of a crowded thrift shop with a big square pathway through all the stuff. Because they didn't have the AC turned on that night, I expected them to stay with me, but the head guy said to the other that they had to get back to work and to just find them next door. When I was done, I could go lock up again. The other guy looked worried and said, "What about the angels?" I whipped back around from my rummaging and asked, "What angels?" The head guy laughed and they left, so I was sure they were trying to mess with me or something. Determined to finish as quickly as possible, I began hunting and hunting, but I needed 2 matching candle holders and was only finding single ones that were too modern-looking for tea lights. Frustrated, I kind of groaned, out loud. Then I got a sudden urge to check a totally different area that had baskets or something odd. Sure enough, there were 2 perfect old-fashioned wall-mounted candle holders, exactly what I was hoping to find. I grabbed them and out loud, I said, "Oh, thank you." Now, Keep in mind I'm the only person in this entire building. The door is closed, there's no AC on, and I did not turn it on. It was stifling hot with no air movement at all. About 10 seconds after I utter my thanks to the theater gods as a whole, a set of wind chimes from the far right begins to chime loudly. I try to brush it off as a coincidence or the guys messing with me, but as I took a step toward the door on the opposite side of the room, I heard a huge crash from the middle of the room. Nothing had fallen or appeared to have moved. That's when I bolted and ran down the stairs. I ran so fast that I found the two guys busily holding up a wall that was being attached to the lines that raised the scenery up and down, along with every other person there that night. I never did work up the nerve to say anything, other than that I was done, but I've asked others about the angels in prop heaven, and everyone gets slightly nervous and changes the subject. It didn't feel malevolent. I'm pretty sure it helped me find the prop I needed, but I won't go up there again without others staying with me next time. I'm currently a custodian at a local high school. My shift is from 4 p.m. to midnight, and we have a pretty large performing arts center. I honestly hate cleaning it at night because it's always dark when I go in, and I have to search around with my phone's flashlight until I get to the light switches in the back of the pack. There's a classroom, 2 bathrooms, and a makeup/costume room with at least 8 mirrors on both sides of the room, facing each other, creating an infinity mirror that terrifies me to look into. My first experience happened when I was out with a coworker who's more sensitive to energies. As we were cleaning the auditorium, we both suddenly felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, despite the lack of open windows or doors. It was as if something, or someone, was passing by us. My coworker stopped in her tracks, looking toward the stage. "Did you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to brush it off, but the atmosphere felt heavy, like a thick fog settling in around us. As we continued our work, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Shadows danced just beyond the corners of my vision, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Every creak of the building seemed amplified, as if the walls were whispering secrets. After a while, I decided I needed a break, so I stepped out into the hallway. But as I walked away, I heard a faint laugh echoing from the auditorium behind me. I turned around, half expecting to see my coworker playing a prank, but she was nowhere in sight. My heart raced as I quickly made my way back to the office, determined to avoid the auditorium for the rest of the night. Now, every time I enter that performing arts center after dark, I keep my flashlight close and my eyes wide open, wary of whatever might be lurking in the shadows. He feels the energy shifts right away, while I usually don't notice them unless they're pointed out or are significantly different. We walked into the makeup room, and he stopped to ask, "Did you feel that the energy changed?" I replied no, but after leaving the room and returning about 5 minutes later, I began to sense a deeper feeling in the atmosphere. It felt heavier than before. I described this sensation, and he agreed that it was indeed what he had felt too. Often, I hear things rattling, like doors and other objects around the back of the building where the makeup room is, which makes me uneasy. It wasn't until my fiancée started working with me yesterday that things became more pronounced. She used to be a Wiccan and had dealt with many paranormal entities and demons over the years. On top of that, she is an empath, making her more sensitive to energy shifts and entities. I made the mistake of discussing the strange feelings and sounds I experienced in that room while we were cleaning the back of the pack. While she was moving around, she suddenly mentioned feeling something brush against her back. Then, when we walked through the doorway to the bathroom, it became significantly colder, even though we had just been there a short time ago. It felt the same temperature as the other rooms. When she pointed this out, I began hearing small voices. I couldn't tell if it was just in my head, or if the squeaky door I was leaning against was making the sounds. I told her to stop talking and ceased moving the door, and then I heard it again. A second too. We left and had my coworker come in and help us. After he was done, he left the building with us across the room, and by the time we got to the hallway to the door, we felt cold for a second, and then everything went back to a regular temperature. People tell me a whole load of stuff, but I have no idea what it is, and all I know is that it terrifies me. When I was younger, I was heavily involved in young people's theater. I grew up in the city of Bath, where most of my childhood was spent at the Royal Bath Youth Theater. Most of the plays we did were performed in the theater studio space. Occasionally, we were allowed to do a show on the main house stage. As the studio theater became more popular for small live events, we had to perform shows at other venues in the city. One venue was the Rondo Theater, located a little ways out of the main city in an area called Lark Hall. I was invited to act in a student production of a Greek play, which, as is often the case with small-scale theater productions, was incredibly behind with technical rehearsals. My best friend at the time, a guy who went by the name of Sonic, was the lighting designer and operator for the show. He had decided that to get the lighting design complete in time for the final dress rehearsal, he needed to spend the night in the theater after everyone else had left. He brought a sleeping bag with him so that he could take the occasional nap in the lighting box. When I showed up the next morning, I inquired as to how it had gone. He told me he got a lot done, but when he tried to sleep, he couldn't. When he reached a point where his focus was dwindling and tiredness was setting in, he laid down for a nap. Throughout the entire night, he was kept awake by the sound of footsteps walking up and down the stairs in the building. He had made sure the building was completely locked up after everyone else had left, so there was no way anyone would be in there. Something worth mentioning is that all the flooring was incredibly creaky. During the show, myself and another actor finished our last scenes and were going to the dressing rooms to wait for our curtain call. The exit from the right side of the stage led to a small corridor with a fire exit to the left and a staircase to the right. The staircase spiraled up, and the single dressing room ran the entire floor space above the stage. During this show, we discovered that walking across the dressing room floor could be heard on the stage and in the auditorium. So we agreed that during the show, we were not going to go into the dressing room when off stage. I returned to the theater some years later to do another show. The director was new to the space, so I informed her of the noise issue from the dressing room. She made the decision that we should keep everyone on stage in some pretentious, edgy style to prevent us from going into the dressing room and causing noise distractions. Before we started rehearsing for the play, I had purchased a brand new Discman. Yes, this was a while ago now, and as with all new toys, I was concerned about getting it stolen if it was left in the dressing room. The only access to the dressing room was via the stage and the side exit door. All I had to do was ensure the door remained locked from the inside at all times, which I checked on frequently. During our first dress rehearsal, I was alarmed to hear the sound of footsteps walking across the dressing room above the stage. I was on this stage, but in a position where I could walk off and not impact the rehearsal. The director might be getting annoyed, but I was willing to risk that for the sake of the 100-pound Discman I could potentially lose. Everyone who was involved in the show was accounted for, which meant that whomever was above us had to have been an unknown, potentially one of the thieves we had been warned about by the theater manager. As I was in this situation where I could not walk away from the rehearsal altogether, I turned to one of the assistant stage managers and told her to check that the side door was still locked and then check the dressing room for an intruder. Surprisingly, she went ahead and did so. When she got back, she informed me there was no one there. Then we heard it again, clear sounds of someone walking back and forth in the dressing room. I told her to check again, and this time check the bathrooms and showers to make sure no one was hiding. Apprehensively, she went up the stairs and returned a second time, telling me again that she saw nothing. The footsteps started again. I insisted she go back and check one more time, but at this point, she was too freaked out and refused to return. I had to go back on stage for a scene, and after a short while, the sound ceased. After rehearsal, I went upstairs expecting to find the dressing room ransacked, but there was nothing. No sign of theft, no sign of anyone having been there. Eventually, I moved to Essex to study at university. 7 or 8 years later, I returned to Bath and met up with a guy who wanted to become my best friend. He had studied theater in Bath, and we were planning on getting some projects going together. We started talking about the paranormal, and he mentioned the Rondo Theater. Years after I had my experiences, he had similar ones when doing shows there. At one point, he inquired with the manager of the theater, who didn't give him any specifics but did acknowledge that strange things did occur. I worked at a camp on an island in Lake Ontario, New York, this summer, and I've been busy, but I just now decided to post about what happened. There was an old abandoned theater that was lost in weeds and overgrown plants. My friends and I decided to explore it, and I have videos of us exploring the theater, but I'm not sure I want to share them. But anyway, while exploring, a lot of strange things were happening. We went back and explored it several times, and each time we went back, something strange would happen. The first incident, my friend Griff and I found a secret hatch to go under the stage. As soon as we opened it, the temperature dropped drastically. The odor under the hatch was of an enclosed room with a ton of spiders and damp ground. See, that's not the scary part. The scary part is what we heard next, which is unfortunately nothing original. We heard footsteps, loud, distinct, and extremely clear, coming from way up in the attic where the bell tower was. It was a town hall converted into a theater in the late 50s and has been abandoned since the 70s. While exploring the building and the actual bell tower, I wanted to ring the bell, so I went to the crawl space and pushed my way through towards the bell. The ceiling was broken in spots, and I could see the auditorium below me. I got into a position where I could stand a bit, and I swear I've never seen anything like this. I saw a ball of light, not like normal white light. It was gray in the middle and grayish blue towards the sides, with a ring of light around it. I swear it looked like it had a 3-foot diameter. It started at the bell, which was 15 feet in front of me, and it zipped right past my leg. Obviously, every single hair on my body was standing up straight. Then it zipped back towards the bell and disappeared halfway back. It happened in seconds, but I remember it like yesterday. I wasn't the only one who saw it. One of my coworkers was right beside me and swears the same thing. My friend Kim can be a little superstitious. Kim and I visited the building on our last visit, and in total, we've been there maybe 5 times. We were walking around re-exploring things we had already seen. We were there to scavenge and find newspapers and school stuff to take home. She kept saying she could see a dark figure. Every time she said that, I would laugh and shake it off, but she only got more serious about it. We ended up leaving because we got creeped out, and I remember her talking to me later about the shadow thing she kept seeing, but I blew it off again. That is until we started going through our pictures we'd taken that day. She took 2 photos that specifically stood out. I have no idea what they are. They could be glare, or I don't know. To me, it looks like a figure coming down the stairs. It's the same figure in the auditorium. Tell me, what do you think of these pictures? I've worked at the cinema for 5 years, and after a year or so, I spoke to one of the managers, Andy, and told him that Scream 4 sometimes gave me the creeps. He paled and told me he felt the same way but never told anyone because he was terrified they'd take the piss. We both sometimes got this weird feeling in there as if someone was watching. At times when I've been cleaning, I've seen a shadow slowly move across the room at the front, as if someone was walking past. But of course, there's no one there. I've since found out several people have seen this too. About a year later, I was talking to another manager, Dee, while on close. Dee told me she hates being in Scream 4, especially when we're closing up. When we close the building, we place Clark bars on the fire exits to secure the doors. The bars are kind of U-shaped and fit into a slotted channel, secured by a big pin that goes through the slot. Inside Scream 4, we have a door on each side with fire exits, and there's also a fire exit in the corridor near Scream 4. Years ago, Dee told me she was shutting down the projection for Scream 4. She placed the bars on the fire exits inside Scream 4 and set the bar on the corridor before walking away. When she got to the top of the corridor, she heard a clattering sound and looked around to see that the bar was back on the floor halfway up the corridor. Dee said she didn't get freaked out at the time. She just put the bar back and carried on. I initially refused to believe Dee because I was convinced she was trying to scare me since we were on a closing shift together. She swore she was telling the truth, and I hesitantly believed her. Over the next few days, I asked the other managers if they'd ever heard Dee's story, but they hadn't. So, I quietly decided that Dee was pranking me and thought no more of it. Fast forward a few years, and Andy was on the closing shift with a couple of guys named Josh. One of them was training to be a manager, so he went with Andy to shut down the projection in Scream 4. The other Josh was putting the bar on Screen 1, which is basically on the other side of the building and on another floor. Andy and trainee Josh placed the bar in the corridor near Scream 4 before going into the projection box to handle the other 2 bars. When they came out, they saw that the bar from the corridor was on the floor, off to the side. It didn't just fall off. It would have had to be moved. Andy was convinced that the other Josh was messing with him because they knew Dee's story, and they asked him about it over the radio, but he said he was nowhere near Scream 4 because he'd been busy in Scream 1. They didn't believe him, so he put the bar back in place, and the three of them went into the office to check the CCTV footage to see if the bar had just come off or if it had been moved to the side. At this point, Andy was freaking out, so they set the alarm and got out of there. The next day, Andy was telling the people on shift about what happened and went to show them the CCTV footage, only to find that it had erased itself for that specific time frame. Another main story my coworker Rob loves to share is what we refer to as the Amos ghost. One time, he was on shift when another coworker, Amos, scared him by hiding around a corner and calling his name. Amos has quite a distinctive voice, so it's very easy to recognize him. Rob laughed it off and didn't think much of it. A day or so later, Rob and I were on shift when another coworker, Kim, came down the stairs to the tills and asked, "Is Amos here? I just heard him say my name." We were confused because he definitely wasn't on shift, and we hadn't seen him come in to watch a film or anything. We would have known if he was there because one of us would have had to process an employee pass at the tills. Kim said she was walking down the corridor when she heard Amos's voice quite close to her, calling her name several times. At this point, Rob had been reading up on spirits imitating people's voices, and he totally believes in the Amos ghost. A few days after Kim's experience, another girl named Emma had a similar encounter in the same corridor. If I remember correctly, she said she heard his voice fairly close to her, whispering a few times. She then heard about what happened to Kim, and being spooked, she ran to the tills where Rob was and told him about it. After she finished recounting her experience, the radio suddenly started blasting out static, which creeped them out even further. Rob still gets really scared when he thinks about this, and I know he believes it, which only adds to his fear as he reads more about this kind of stuff. As for the static on the radio, I'm not sure what to think. It could have just been interference, but any thoughts or comments on what's happening at the movie theater would be welcome. I live in a small, quiet town in England, quite rural. The town itself has a couple of thousand people, and one of the main hotspots is our old antique movie theater, which is nearly 100 years old. I'm guessing it still has the original seating and everything, though it has been refurbished a few times. Spectre or intruder, but there's no one in sight. My heart races as I take a few cautious steps into the hallway, still gripping my leaf blower like it's a weapon. The silence is deafening, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I remind myself that it's just an old theater and that my mind is probably playing tricks on me. I backtrack to the entry hall, trying to regain my composure. After a moment, I convince myself that it was just the echoes of my imagination and resume cleaning. I start up the leaf blower again, but the unsettling feeling lingers in the air. Just as I'm about to get lost in the mundane task, I hear it again, those footsteps. This time, they sound closer, almost like they're circling back around. I stop the blower and listen intently. The sound is unmistakable, the distinct click of heels on the floor. I glance at my phone, and the time is ticking away, but all I can focus on is the chilling realization that I'm alone in this big, empty building. After a few moments, I muster the courage to call out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice echoes back at me, adding to the eeriness of the situation. No response, just the silence of the theater, making it feel more oppressive. I take a deep breath and push through the fear, deciding to investigate again. I slowly walk toward the back of the theater, hoping to find the source of the noise, or at least reassure myself that I'm alone. As I reach the main auditorium, I pause, looking around the dimly lit room. The seats are empty, and the screen is dark. Suddenly, I hear the footsteps again, but this time, they seem to be coming from the projection room above me. I instinctively look up, my heart racing, and call out once more, "If someone is up there, you need to leave." The footsteps stop abruptly. For a split second, there's complete silence, and then I hear what sounds like a soft whisper, almost like a response. It sends chills down my spine, and I quickly turn to make my way back toward the exit, feeling like I need to get out of there as quickly as possible. As I approach the front doors, I can't shake the feeling that something is following me. I finally make it outside and lock the doors behind me, taking a moment to catch my breath. The night air feels cool against my flushed face, and I can't help but glance back at the theater, half expecting to see a shadow in one of the windows. Once I'm safely in my car, I drive away, vowing never to work the late shift alone again. That night remains etched in my memory, a chilling reminder that some places hold secrets that should stay hidden. I half expect a demon to lash out and rip my soul from my body, or to hear a disembodied scream, but there's nothing and no one. I turn back around, grab my leaf blower, and carry on working. That's it for the night. A few months later, I hadn't told anyone my story again. I was closing up after finishing for the night. The film was over, and my partner was busy counting money, something I'm not very good at when the cinema closes. I had finished blowing and sweeping away all the popcorn, and it had been a fairly clean night. Right as I was turning things off in the projector room, I suddenly heard a small child laugh. I nearly crapped myself. I turned around, thinking there's no way anyone could be here at 12:45 at night. To my horror, I saw a brief flash and heard what sounded like footsteps running down from the projector room. It took me a few seconds to register what had happened, and I slowly started to walk toward the stairs. I looked down and clearly saw no one. At that point, I was just about done. I didn't really know what to do and couldn't tell my partner because he would think I was afraid. So, I slowly locked up and walked down the stairs, maintaining a blank expression on my face. Just as my partner was finishing up and I was handing him the key, he said, "Hey, what's up? You look pretty spooked." I told him it was nothing, but he sensed that something had happened. He then whispered, "Did you see something?" I gave him a shy nod, and he replied, "Oh, that's okay. I've seen them too." As I mentioned, this is a small town, and we walked vaguely in the same direction for the first 7 or so minutes. While walking through the empty streets with him, he shared his own experience in the theater. Apparently, years ago, when he had been working there longer, he saw a full-bodied apparition of a child standing in a doorway well past midnight. He ran to them, but the moment he reached the spot where they were no longer there. He said it freaked him out so badly that he ran out of the theater, locked it, and left, only to be scolded by the manager the next morning, who, apparently, had never seen anything. We both agreed to keep it to ourselves, yet there are still times when I can't shake that uneasy feeling while at work, the sensation that something is there watching me. We have a theater in our town that was built in the 1930s, and as is tradition, there are plenty of stories of people noticing strange cold spots, things in the green room being moved, and the occasional whisper in someone's ear, among other things. However, there have been no reported sightings for years until my daughter started spending more time there with me. She's sensitive to these things. Her first sighting happened one night when there were only 3 of us in the bio box. After she arrived, she went out to the auditorium. A few minutes later, she came back and casually said, "I saw the ghost down in the green room." I asked if that was why she left the room, and she replied yes, explaining that she saw something white go past the auditorium door and got a feeling, so she went to have a look. She described seeing a lady in a long, old-fashioned white dress in the women's dressing room, standing in front of the mirror as if she were putting on makeup, but she didn't have a reflection. I specifically asked her about that. A few weeks ago, we were there to see a show, and when the house lights went down, there were voices and sound effects in the darkness. They lasted for about 30 seconds or so, and she whispered to me, "Is someone on the stage?" "Oh, never mind. It's just her," she said, adding that she saw her standing downstage center, right in front of the stage, and that she faded away when the stage lights came up. I've asked around since then, and a few people have said they've seen her as well, but only once each. I myself have spent many nights alone in that place, programming lights, and I've never seen a thing, although sometimes I feel like I'm not alone. I never really get creeped out either, so that's good, I guess. Throughout the 2000s, I was part of a tiny independent theater company with zero funding. Every show we did came out of our own pockets, so we needed a venue that would let us work for cheap. We found one in a local historic theater. This place was mostly a music venue, but they had a tiny theater upstairs, and the owners were awesome. We were allowed to rehearse for free and just pay a small fee each performance night. We did so many Shakespeares with loud music, usually metal, coming through the floor, Hamlet's soliloquies accompanied by corn. It was quite the sight to see. This place also had a documented history of hauntings. Several of us had small experiences here and there. Knocking sounds, things falling over, disappearing from where they were put. Nothing that couldn't be explained away by the chaos of rehearsal. except perhaps the feeling of perpetually being watched. One summer night, we were rehearsing in the upstairs bar area. The owners were great to us, but they couldn't afford to turn on the AC, so it was very hot. There were hanging curtains separating the bar from the storage area behind it, and I watched casually as someone started to push through them. There was a very clear human outline standing there, pushing out the curtains for about 10 to 15 seconds before it slowly and clearly backed away. I was the only one who saw it. I thought it was odd, obviously, to stand with your face in a curtain for that long, but it wasn't unusual for the cleaning staff to be there this late, and I assumed one of them had to stop and think. Perhaps they had forgotten something and returned to the kitchen. But who does that? Who stands like that and then backs away instead of turning around like a normal person? It felt like someone was messing with us. It was just too weird. When the scene was over, I asked if anyone else was in the building. No, the staff had left 2 hours ago and given the director the keys to lock up. I asked if the AC was on, and everyone laughed. But when I told them what I saw, we all listened anyway. The AC was loud, but it definitely wasn't on. We chalked it up to the theater ghost and moved on. After that, I started talking to him when I was alone and felt watched. I told him he was creeping me out, and he'd back off. He still messed with us for years after that, once stealing a prop that had already been placed and confirmed by several people in the middle of a show. But he wasn't so bad for a ghost. I always heard that there was more than one ghost there, and sometimes the feeling of being watched did feel malevolent. However, the guy who felt familiar tended to show up and run the other one off. Or maybe that was just me creeping myself out. But on that night, I definitely saw something I couldn't explain away. As we reflect on the strange experiences at the cinema, it's not just the ghosts or the laughter of children that we remember, but also the memories and connections we've made. These stories bring us more than just thrills. They remind us that there may be more to life than what we see with our eyes. The movie theater isn't just a place to watch great films. It's a vibrant space where the past and present collide, gifting us with tales that never truly fade away. If you enjoyed these spooky experiences, don't forget to give us a like, share this video with your friends, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more captivating stories coming your way. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.